Opposed to vet couples wanting to adopt, will sell you a report that is totally unchecked.
But will you now admit that this is a worthless document?
Well, on the face of what you say, it seems to be a worthless document, yes.
It's sort of an open secret as to who are the principal lawyers involved in this trafficking of children.
As the months go on, you get more and more excited about it, and it just rips your heart apart to find out that the child never really even existed.
It was evil. It was selling babies. It was procuring flesh. That's all it amounted to.
I have never met such a set of selfish, self-opinionated people in my life. They turn me sick to my stomach, the people that I've met.
Guatemala in Central America is famous for its ancient temples and its exports of coffee and sugarcane. But in Britain, it's becoming infamous for another export, babies. And this man, lawyer Juan Varela, known as the king of the baby bandits, is behind much of the trade. He and his sister Marilena exploit a backdoor route to get round immigration laws. They hand over the babies at European airports, along with passports issued in Guatemala in the name of the new parents. Atlanta, one of America's richest cities and home of this year's Olympic Games. It's also the home of one of Varela's principal associates in this heartless trade. Leah Serrano scours Europe looking for childless couples to exploit. Our 12-month investigation into Leah Serrano and Juan Varela began when the Cook Report was approached by Steve and Pat Hampson. Married for 13 years, Steve, a 38-year-old trainee lecturer, and Pat, a secretary aged 32, are unable to have children.
I went to a private slimming clinic nearby and to try and get some tablets to help me to slim, to make my chances of getting pregnant a lot better. But instead of talking me through that, she actually talked me through adopting from abroad. When I said that both me and my husband were too old, or I thought we were too old, she said that that wouldn't be a problem, that she'd put us in touch with Leah Serrano in Atlanta, and it could all be done through the loopholes in the British system.
Registering with Leah Serrano costs Pat and Steve £150. Incredibly, what follows is a mail-order list of the babies Leah Serrano can obtain. Pat and Steve need a home study report into their fitness to adopt. They're put in contact with an independent social worker, Jim Wroe. They soon learn he's more interested in money than accuracy, insisting his £750 fee is paid in cash.
What's happened is that the rates have gone up.
The home study report is perhaps the most important document in any adoption. It delves in intimate detail into lifestyle, family background, finances, health, and any possible criminal convictions of the prospective parents. Most countries insist that this is done by the local authority and then passed with other relevant documents to central government for verification, in Britain's case by the Department of Health. Guatemala, though, seems to ignore these basic safeguards and is happy to accept a private report commissioned and paid for by the would-be adopters.
These things ought to be done by social services, quite frankly.
And as his two-day session with Pat and Steve ends, Jim Wroe confirms his unofficial route guarantees success.
But at least this is a pretty, sort of certain method of getting the family that you want. You will actually get there.
He asked some bizarre questions while he was here over the weekend. He seemed more interested in the £750 that he was charging us. He went home, he hadn't seen any of our police clearances because it hadn't come through. With the day that we actually got the signed report back was the same day that we got the clearance from the police and the medicals, but yet in the report he's put that he actually saw those, so he's lied basically.
That privately commissioned home studies are not acceptable in the UK. They don't suffice as a substitute for local authority home studies in adoption proceedings in the UK. They do not suffice for immigration.
But Jim Wroe knows they will suffice in Guatemala. After all, he's done them before. Wroe is also a court-appointed child guardian, a role, as we shall see later, for which he seems unfit. Guatemala's history is as explosive as its volcanoes. A Catholic country, it has a population of 12 million, half under the age of 15. It's been ravaged by a civil war, which ended only a few months ago. Life is still precarious, and most shops and offices and the homes of the rich have armed guards. Even the Coca-Cola lorry has a gun-toting escort. The years of violence and poverty have forced many onto the streets, bringing a new commodity onto the criminal market.
Babies like these at a nursery in one of Guatemala City's poorer areas are prime targets for the baby bandits, who employ teams of disreputable doctors, social workers and midwives to find them their stock in trade. Babies are taken under false pretenses, stolen and even bought, and so successful are the baby bandits that the adoption of these children to foreigners is now this country's biggest non-traditional export.
Scores of parents report young babies stolen every year. Often they end up with new identities in so-called fattening houses like this, ready to be shipped abroad. Occasionally the police do go in, and in this raid more than a dozen babies were discovered being held by a gang of baby traffickers.
The lawyers seemingly have groups of people who go out scouting around. Often, and it's been proven that there are orphanages that have been started by lawyers, one would think as a gesture of humanity, but it's often like a supermarket for adopting families, and they'll come in and they'll take a look. There are also fattening houses, because families don't want to adopt a shriveled up baby, and the birth weight of the average baby born here is very low. And so they have fattening houses with a high protein diet to make them nice and chubby and more adoptable, and a better price, of course.
Bruce Harris is Central American Director of Casa Alianza, an aid foundation dedicated to helping street children.
Buenos dias.
The young homeless girls his organization helps are prime targets for the baby gangs.
The modus operandi of getting these babies, there are two main areas. One is they go out to the rural areas looking for families who are extremely poor and basically buy their baby. And the other is through theft of babies on the street. And what we have are corrupt intermediaries, the lawyers, who are making a lot of money off of this.
Juan Varela collects around $500,000 a year from the baby trade, more than 400 times the salary of a Guatemalan judge. His wife, sister, daughter and 2 sons are all in the business. His sumptuous home on the outskirts of Guatemala City is hidden behind a high wall with armed guards and a barrier across the road. He's well known to the police and the authorities in Guatemala. This year alone, he'll handle over 50 overseas adoptions. Court records show the extent of his trade in babies. Most used to go to the lucrative markets in North America, but that changed 2 years ago when the United States and Canada brought in DNA testing to make sure the babies actually came from the women registered as their mothers.
We'll ring you round about, say...
With the help of Leah Serrano, who runs an adoption brokering business in Atlanta, Georgia, Varela turned to other markets, particularly in Britain, where she had already established contacts.
I will. Thank you very much, Leah.
The authorities in Atlanta and other American cities believe Leah Serrano has gone out of business, but we can reveal she's still operating from executive offices in this building and using a mailing address 100 miles down the road across the state line in South Carolina. By now, Pat and Steve have been invited to meet Leah in Atlanta. She shows them Stone Mountain, a local beauty spot. But back at the hotel, she still has business on her mind.
13, 14, 1,500. Yeah, do you want to...
Pat counts out the next installment of her fee in cash. Leah Serrano pockets $1,500, around £1,000. So, what are Pat's first impressions?
She's been doing it for that long now. She knows what she's doing. She knows what she has to say to people. She knows the kind of impression she has to get across. I know what you want and what you need, i.e. a baby. She knows that we're desperate to have a child. and she knows that she's got the one thing that we want, so she can play it how she wants.
That's precisely what she did with Debbie Carlisle, with painful results. 8 years ago, the lawyer Leah Serrano was then dealing with in El Salvador was arrested for child stealing and smuggling. Although Debbie and her husband had paid money to foster a baby girl prior to adoption, the child just didn't exist.
I think Leah Serrano is unconscionable. She runs her agency for dollars, and she doesn't think about the feelings of people. She emotionally rapes everyone. She uses psychological sabotage to manipulate people because she dangles this beautiful child in front of them, something that they're desperately wanting in their lives. And it's a very, very sad situation. I'm very, very upset to find out that she's still practicing.
Through the 80s, Leah Serrano ran an adoption agency across America called Children's Services International. Business boomed and she moved to this smart district of Atlanta, buying this $250,000 luxury home. Income rose to nearly $1 million a year as the agency arranged adoptions from Southeast Asia and Central America. Then the authorities began to take an interest after receiving complaints. As they delved into Children's Services International, they unearthed horror story after horror story. The Ackermans, the baby they were to adopt, had been stolen. The Parises, baby Ben, had chronic heart problems. The Bells and the Latours paid $1,500 each. Neither couple received a child. Baby Amanda Larson had serious heart and lung problems and died after major surgery. Wayne and Donna Mori paid $1,600 for a baby from the Philippines. There was no baby. Serrano had no permission to adopt from that country.
It was evil. It was selling babies. It was procuring flesh. That's all it amounted to. Let me play on your emotions. Let me hold you for ransom. Hold your emotions for ransom. You give me the money, I will deliver.
But she didn't deliver. After a 3-day hearing in Atlanta, Leah Serrano's license to operate an adoption agency was withdrawn by the state authorities. In the judgment, her activities were heavily criticized. At the same time, Children's Services International was being investigated in Florida. James Sawyer led that investigation.
It was a very, very slick operation. It was well designed, well carried out. It was, from our perspective, we saw it essentially as a very smooth con.
So what, in your view, is Leah Serrano doing to the childless couples she obviously targets?
This is an operation that does indeed prey on people who are emotionally desperate, who are anxious, will do almost anything to get a child that they have been trying for years to get. And when they are promised a child, their rationality, their sense of self-defense, their normal skepticism flies right out the window. And they become helpless, primed to be victims.
Remember Jim Wroe, the social worker who produced and signed Pat and Steve's home study report without seeing their police details? We invite him to vet another couple wanting to adopt. Again, he doesn't even do the basic checks. If he had, he would have discovered that the couple were bogus. The wife, Hillary, is part of our undercover team, and the husband, we call Terry, is a convicted child abuser. After a few hours chatting to the bogus couple, Wroe produces this glowing recommendation for adoption.
Terry and Hillary have a loving, stable relationship and an extensive supportive network of friends and relatives. They appear well able to offer a loving, understanding and comfortable home for an adoptive Guatemalan baby.
Mr. Wroe, Roger Cook, Central Television. I'd like you to explain a couple of the home study reports you did for prospective parents of Guatemalan children. Do you remember these two people? Do you remember Terry and Hillary?
Yes.
Yes? And you took money from them for a report? You checked not a thing. All the references were false. Every last one of them was false.
Well, false.
They were false, and this man is a convicted child abuser.
Oh, God. Convicted child abuser?
Yes. Genuinely a convicted child abuser who volunteered to do this for us to see how good you were at checking.
But we can't check, as I said.
You haven't checked anything. You didn't check the references are false. You didn't find any of that out.
I couldn't.
You didn't check it. It's worthless.
It's not finished, Mr. Coates.
It is finished. This is the final report signed by you. Your signature, isn't it?
I acted in good faith in preparing a basic report for them and said I would get in touch with them this week to continue, which I have done.
This says,
I've left a message on their
Terry
answer
and Hillary have a loving, stable relationship and an extensive and supportive network of friends and relatives. They appear well able to offer a loving, understanding and comfortable home for an adopted...
Appear well able to. I mean, it's a basic report, Mr. Cook. That's as much
It's
as
a joke, isn't it?
It's a basic
joke.
social circumstances
It's a key
report.
document without which the adoption could not go ahead.
It's one of the documents which is necessary for the adoption to go ahead.
But will you now admit that this is a worthless document?
Well, on the face of what you say, it seems to be a worthless document, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wroe also does emergency work for Islington Council in North London. Today they suspended him, pending an investigation. By now, Pat and Steve have paid another $600 to Serrano and are arriving in Guatemala City to meet her lawyer partner, Juan Varela.
Hello.
Hours after arriving, 6-week-old Jonathan is delivered to the door of their hotel room. Immediately, they fall in love with him.
Gorgeous. Aren't you? Gorgeous.
But there are problems. Varela wants Steve and Pat to move to another hotel, which he controls, where he can ensure that he keeps his baby business hidden from the prying eyes of the authorities.
Not full side.
Pat and Steve have been ordered not to leave their bedroom or take the baby out of the hotel. As they take on the role of mum and dad for the first time, they learn of another restriction laid down by the Varela family.
She said that he would have to actually go back at 6 o'clock tonight. We couldn't have him all night. Whereas if we'd gone in the hotel that they wanted us to go in, then we'd have been able to have him all the time. We'd have been able to walk around the hotel with him, go in the grounds of the hotel. There'd have been no problem.
Next morning, Varela himself turns up. He insists they move.
Sorry about that.
Shortly afterwards, they do move to the Casa Grande Hotel, a safe haven for Varela's operation. But we're already learning more of Varela's sinister reputation. The baby bandits operate mostly in the slums. Social worker Myrna Ponthe knows them all too well.
There are professionals who dedicate themselves to adoptions for money. It's very sophisticated, with doctors, nurses, midwives telling mothers their child has died at birth or pressurizing mothers to give up their babies. Varela is king of the baby bandits.
Marvin and Victoria Castro know of Varela's activities at first hand. Just over 4 years ago, their son, Marvin Jr., then aged 12 months, was stolen by a babysitter. Victoria and her husband spent a week trudging the streets, looking for eyewitnesses and showing sketches of the babysitter to passers-by. Astonishingly, after 8 days, the kidnapper was traced to the local prison after a woman recognized the sketch.
The police talked to the woman who broke down and cried. She told them my son was with a wealthy family. A lawyer called Juan Varela and gave his office address.
According to the police, the kidnapper knew Juan Varela bought babies and she'd sold Marvin to him for $300. Police visited Varela's office in the downtown area of the capital and threatened to arrest everyone there.
The police told the secretary, who was Marilena, that if my son was not produced immediately, everyone would be arrested. She made a telephone call, and a short time later, Marvin was delivered to Varela's office. He was dressed in girls' clothes and was ill.
The police also recovered this bogus birth certificate in the name of Eliseo Cruz, falsely registering Marvin's birth in the town of Escuintla. And it's perhaps no coincidence that the birth of Jonathan, the baby being offered to Pat and Steve,
is also registered in Escuintla. But when we check the register, we're in for a surprise. We discover the original name has been inexpertly blotted out and another name written in. The registrar is horrified.
The certificate should not have been tampered with. This certificate is now invalid, and if this child is to go for adoption, I will inform the courts of what has happened.
We are told that Jonathan's mother is named in the register as Reina Judith Pineda Vazquez, and we're given copies of her identity documents. Her home is recorded as being a remote village 25 miles away on the edge of the jungle. The villagers there eke out a poor living from the land. They're a close-knit community centred on the village church, where everyone knows everyone else. But when we show the identity documents to the villagers, none of them recognises the woman, said to be 19 and a single mother. Not even a man who's lived there for 37 years. The news for Pat and Steve is shattering. They're shocked to find there are doubts about Jonathan's background. It's the final confirmation that they have to hand him back.
Today we held our dream in our hands, and if there was some way that we could have kept that dream, be it wrong, we would have kept him. And I know that's wrong, and I know that we would have been as wrong as the people who are prepared to turn a blind eye to it. We've been told more information, and we now know that it's been proven that it's wrong.
Time to confront the scheming woman who arranged the deal.
Leah Serrano, Roger Cook, Central Television.
Yes.
I want to talk to you about your scandalous record in the adoption business.
I think that you have the wrong person.
No, we have the right person.
No.
The person described, for example, in the court documents before you were banned in this particular state as somebody who was a fraudulent seller of flesh without any regard, with wanton disregard. Oh no!
I'm so sorry.
And you are
speak with you
and you are dealing, as you well know, with a man with an appalling record in Guatemala. A man who forges documents, a man who has children snatched. You know that very well, and it's not the first time you've done it. You did it in El Salvador as well. You have an appalling record. You're a shark, aren't you? You have been banned in another state, in Florida. And now you're trying to do it through the back door by operating out of a mail drop address in South Carolina. And having had your business shut down in this part of the world, you're trying to open up in Europe. You should be ashamed of yourself.
Tonight, with the help of our evidence, the authorities in Atlanta have reopened their files on Leah Serrano. For Pat and Steve, who volunteered to help us, there remain only bitter memories.
We've only had him for 3 days and it's ripping us apart. I can't put into words the way I feel about that evil bastard. And he held that baby up like it was a trophy. He's one evil bastard.